Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Baptista. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Chef Compliance here at Chef Progress. It is my great pleasure to introduce this keynote, one of our breakout sessions with illustrious Jay Velzen from SAP. He was going to be covering how many targets, story of how SAP selected Chef Inspect for cloud security posture management. In this session, Jay will describe some of their challenges and how Chef Inspect answered them, and how co-innovation and partnership efforts between Chef and SAP have allowed for them to, and the community for that matter, allowed them to really change how they look at cloud security posture. This is a pre-recording session that will be part of ChefConf. During the ChefConf session, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us on the community channel, on the Chef community channel in Slack. Well, Jay has been with SAP since 2019. He's been the lead for multi-cloud SecDevOps and NetDevOps teams at SAP's public cloud landscapes, covering thousands of cloud accounts across AWS, Azure, GCP, and Alibaba Cloud. And with over 10 million cloud resources across these three and growing at a very rapid pace. The scale alone poses some interesting challenges. Shift left or die, as he says. With his partners in multi-cloud network and security architecture, they were able to work together with SAP Global Security and other stakeholders in SAP to transform really how public cloud security gets performed at mass scale, and where cloud resources doubled annually. So Jay, why don't you take it away? Thank you again for presenting this, and I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting story to hear more about.
My pleasure, Alan, and I'm delighted to be here at ChefConf. Just to give a little bit of an overview of SAP, because I think we're like the really big software company that most people have never heard of before, especially if you don't work for a very large enterprise. But SAP is actually the top 3 software company in the world. I think it's Microsoft and someone else that I didn't check to look up ahead of us. But we are typically known for our ERP software, but we also do analytics, supply chain management, human capital management, master data management, data integration and experience management with package solutions for 25 industries, 12 lines of businesses, and solutions on-premise, cloud, and hybrid. And I will tell you that's just about the last marketing for the company that you'll hear from me during the session. What is important is that we're dealing with, a very big size. We're 100,000 plus employees globally, of which about 24,000 are in research and development. And one of the things that I always find interesting, because it gives a bit of a perspective of like maybe the seriousness of the things that we do, but 77% of the world's transaction and revenue touches a SAP system somewhere along the way, which is quite staggering. And if we talk about business transaction revenue, that is 85%. So we deal with really big stuff on a day-to-day basis, and like large corporations rely on SAP software to do their financials, to operate administratively. So we take that with a big sense of responsibility. Increasingly, we provide our software as a service instead of more traditionally in the previous 3 decades since the 70s as on-premise software. And we're increasingly also using public cloud. So that is a big aspect of where I'm coming from. My team is the multi-cloud team that really interfaces between SAP lines of businesses and the different cloud providers, AWS, Azure, and GCP, as well as AliCloud in China, to be provide the services on different kinds of platforms. SAP has always had this motto of SAP doesn't pick winners, customers do, specifically when it comes to platforms. ERP, traditionally you could have in any database platform that you wanted that was of a particular reasonable market size, and that was essentially the same idea with multi-cloud. A lot of our customers have already chosen their own preferred supplier, and we're happy to provide solutions on whichever supplier that they want. So it does pose some unique challenges to, when we talk to others where they ask us like, hey, multi-cloud, is that a good idea? We're thinking about it. I usually say, like, do you have to? Right. For us, this was an a priori business decision, and I know of a few others that we've spoken to where that was also the case, either strategic or for pick the best of the bunch for a particular workload. But it is not something that you do like, especially if you have to provide the security, governance, billing, and so on around it that the multi-cloud team does. You end up doing everything multiple times. So that is not something that we necessarily recommend. But if you have to, then you have no choice, and that's what you do. Now, what has also happened is that SAP grew in cloud resources very rapidly to about 13 million, 14 million today. The multi-cloud team started in 2017 to create some organization around this. Initially, the use of public cloud was very much related to development environments, sandboxes, try something out. It's pretty much how everybody starts. And then it became clear that, teams were just using company credit cards to start running actual workloads. And now it was time to do something and intervene. And that's essentially when the multi-cloud team was created. So, we didn't have that much going on, but it allowed us to do things like set up accounts within the organization, centralize billing, and so on. And but it's probably a good idea to briefly clarify is what do I mean by a cloud resource, because that's not necessarily obvious. It's to a certain extent somewhat meaningless term, but you have to count something. And what we don't like is to just count VMs, because that misses a lot of the landscape. So a cloud resource is basically anything, any virtual resource that can be created inside of a cloud account or an Azure subscription or a Google project. So this includes the storage, networking components, anything essentially that you could express as infrastructure as code or a managed service that you could create. So in January 2019, we were at about 1.8 million. We had already the projected growth of growing double in size every year. And over the last 2 years, that has indeed happened. We even exceeded it a little bit, and at current growth rates were actually ahead of that this year. So scale is something that is on our mind the whole time. It's like what I start my day with and what I go to bed with, because if we don't do anything, if we don't prepare for this growth, and especially given that we typically plan 2-3 years ahead, I need to be prepared for now, having security operations around potentially 30 million cloud resources 3 years from now. So this is something that is dominating constantly everything that we do. So the team is entirely based around infrastructure as code, trying to bring those practices and evangelize them through the organization in order to make sure that other teams also realize that you can scale in public cloud just on the basis of people power. So we went through this initial growth wave before I joined the team. There was a program that was helping to accelerate teams into public cloud. I will admit that the focus was to accelerate people into public cloud, not necessarily to provide a secure and compliant framework. Although we did have already the policies and hardening procedures defined by our SAP Global Security Organization. This is an organization of about 800 people in SAP that's responsible for a wide variety of security functions, including setting policies and compliance frameworks, security incident response, threat detection, and a whole bunch of policy and contractual regulatory related items, and how you drive a security culture through the company. And we were already working with these guys up to a certain point, but I think we will, in hindsight, agree that that relationship wasn't necessarily super mature. What these specific policies and hardening procedures are in context of the SAP security framework is they try to abstract common security requirements across the landscape. So if you think of requirements for ISO or SOC or CIS benchmarks or like NIST or any sort of frameworks, what we try to do is abstract those out a little bit so that a good security baseline exists. So when we go through regulatory requirements or certification audits, you're very likely to pass those. So think of these as good security practices and policies that match much of what you're probably familiar with, like, make sure that you have encryption at rest, encryption in transit, use MFA. It's a whole series of those types of policies and procedures. They also are for each individual cloud provider. So we have individual ones for AWS, Azure, GCP, and Ali Cloud. And one of the problems that we had was that these were maybe a little bit too well hidden. So you kind of had to know where they were. They did have the strength of corporate policy already, so you had to do it. But we didn't have a whole lot of follow-up capabilities. One of the reasons was we deployed our first CSPM tool at the time. Now, remember, this is in 2018 or so when this was first deployed. The market was not particularly mature. All of the players providing cloud native security tooling were either very new or looking to port security tooling from data center into cloud where it didn't necessarily apply. We picked the first one. We're not really going to talk about who those were. That's not particularly relevant. But the problem we had already is that we were already deployed in GCP. We knew that we had to provide coverage for Ali Cloud, but we didn't have resources deployed there yet. And this tool only provided coverage for AWS and Azure at the time. What we did do is implement the alerts according to the SGS policy and hardening procedures, so that we had at least could detect to what extent teams were complying with those policies, and made that available to the individual lines of businesses and developer teams to consult, which, as we will see, they didn't do very much. That was pretty much where I joined the team. This was sort of an interesting moment in my life. I've been doing IoT and operational technology security for SAP, so mostly looking at sort of the manufacturing and industrial side of the house. And an old buddy of mine who used to run the Co-Innovation Center had just been named head of multi-cloud operations, gave me a call and said, would you like to run network and security operations for me? And I've been in a variety of security roles, but those were mostly advisory. So you're always either telling somebody what to do or recommending, but this was really the chance to, okay, let's go do something. This could be quite interesting. And he sketched me a little bit what the situation was, but in hindsight, maybe that was only part of a partial story. The interview rounds were very interesting because it was a team already, and even more so now, of a lot of fairly young cloud native people that were really brought into the organization because of their cloud native skills, whereas SAP as a whole perhaps was not quite there yet. So I was more familiar with the pace of the old organization. And I remember in one of my early weeks, we talked on a Tuesday about maybe, would be good if we had a checkbox somewhere in a ticket so that we, it was something very practical. And on Friday, somebody gave me a call and said, okay, but let me show you. And I thought he's going to show me a design concept or something like that. And he's like, what do you think? And it's like, oh, that's a real web page. Yeah. Okay. All right. When is this going to production? Like, when you say yes, like now? Yeah. That was not quite the sort of way of working that I was used to. Like, this is a really amazing group of DevOps people that do things really fast, understand the landscape really well, and I'm privileged to work with them. But there weren't that many of them. They were doing heroic work. And we had leadership that was sort of a mix of cloud native people, as well as some more people used to SAP or like veteran leaders. You can think of it like sometimes there's a bit of a clash, right? Where you get the sort of really corporate types and then the very cloudy types. When I walked up to our floor the first time, I was still just this a bit the culture in SAP. You put on a shirt with a collar. And I got to the multi-cloud floor and it was all hoodies, and even my global vice president was wearing a hoodie. So it's like, okay, I'm cool, I'm home. Finally, I can be relaxed at work in what I'm comfortable with. And, cloud ops and security is like, that's, maybe I should wear 2 hoodies. So what also happened was, obviously, given that my responsibility was security operations, I started looking, okay, let's look at our CSPM tool. What's the state of the land? And it wasn't that good. It wasn't that good. We were still in that growth phase where it was more important to move into cloud as fast as possible. And there was sort of an attempt to not do the extremely stupid thing, but the situation definitely needed some attention. And we were very lucky. I put a slide deck together to let my own organization know what was going on, that we had needed some attention. And what is actually also an interesting part of it is that I asked the team if they had tried to communicate that before, but they were asked to put the information into a fairly rigid corporate template for quarterly updates, and the way that had ultimately come out maybe hadn't quite grabbed the attention as it should have. So I have a background in analytics, so I'm a big fan of like trying to visualize problems with charts, and put a deck together, start socializing that a little bit. And then we were very lucky because in July 2019, we had new global security leadership in place. Tim McKnight, now our chief security officer, had been brought on a couple of months before, but brought in as number 2, Richard Puckett. at one point, they actually like both went up a level, so that Tim McKnight is now the Chief Security Officer, and Richard Puckett is the Chief Information Security Officer. And we met. They were doing the rounds. They were based in the Philadelphia area, but came over to Palo Alto to meet the teams there. I had a meeting with them. They were still in the middle of the introduction, and I passed over my deck, and Tim said to Richard, like, yeah, I know that we had some agenda to talk about, but rather than some overall strategy, let's talk about this slide deck over here, and pass that over. So at that moment, we knew that, you know, we had at least gotten a little bit of attention of the state of the landscape. And that was literally right on time, because 3 weeks later in North America, people will remember maybe, in August of 2019, there was a lot of noise around Capital One breach that exposed 100 million American citizens or Americans' personal information, including credit card. These were all like credit card application type stuff. This is how it had all the private information that you could think of, and about 6 million Americans. And the funny thing is that when a lot of the people in InfoSec first heard about this, it was like, oh, another one, and went on with their day. But it had some really interesting features. This was not the usual attack where someone simply tries to steal stuff, or the recent ransomware. There were some interesting, almost political motivations behind it that probably caused the medium storm to be a bit higher than it otherwise would have been. And it led to some questions. And I also want to make really sure, like, the fact that this became a big thing inside of SAP is nothing to do with the team at Capital One. We actually know some people there that did a really good job. They, at the time, were no doubt far more sophisticated than we were, given the landscape. And even if you look at the details of the incident, which I encourage you to do, like, this is not simple stuff. So let's be very clear that I'm not referring to this as the incident that happened at Capital One. I'm talking about here about what the resonance was of that incident inside of SAP, because it did lead to questions from customers. Like, it basically broke out of the normal security media information cycle into the executive board, and we were asked, or our chief security officer was asked, tell me you don't have this problem. And he was like, well, I'm not sure if I can really tell you that we don't. So this led to a series of discussions. I reached out to the multi-cloud team, myself and my colleagues, of like, what do we do about this? Like, what do we do to get this situation rectified as soon as possible? And that became something we called internally Project Evolve, with the initial goal to, within about 2 months, get control over the situation and get rid of all high severity policy violations in the landscape. Now, let's be clear, that was not a realistic goal to begin with. First of all, we're always going to have some new resources get deployed every day, and it's not everything is so tied down that teams, are limited to very, restricted landscapes. So we're always going to have some, and the time scale perhaps was the most ambitious. I think both Tim and Richard were relatively new to the organization, didn't quite understand the size and scale of it and how fast it moved. Plus, this was work that came on top of the work that we were already doing, because we were also deploying our second CSPM tool. The first one, as I said, didn't provide GCP support. They also did not intend to provide AliCloud support, and ultimately got replaced by a different tool. It's we onboarded during the Q3 mostly of 2019, which at least gave us visibility into GCP. So it was, of course, hard to remediate GCP landscapes if you didn't even know what kind of alerts you had. And the monitoring of AliCloud then started in early 2021, if I remember correctly. We had, from the start, hope for greater visibility. It was deployed as a separate instance because we were at the time the largest landscape that they had under view. And we had some initial teething problems, but that's kind of normal when you're onboard accounts, that many accounts. I think we were at like about 6,000-7,000 accounts across AWS, Azure, and GCP Global at the time. And I think 2019, I think we were about just under or around 3 million cloud resources. Because we weren't making very quick progress, and what I maybe failed to tell is when we first put the Project Evolve together, that was on the basis of a couple of short and medium term recommendations. The medium term, or the short term were like, okay, start driving the organization down, find the ownership of the account owners, call them to the responsibility and make them fix their landscapes. That proved to be actually quite difficult. What we hadn't counted on is, and this happens when you grow very quickly, you create a record of who owns a cloud account, but if you don't follow up, then after a while, maybe there, through changes in the organization, people move different teams. Some of that account ownership gets a little bit diluted. If you then call them up and say like, hey, we have some issues with policy violations in your cloud account. If they then tell you like, oh, but I left that team, now you have a problem. So now who do we go to? So that the problems kind of got a little bit bigger because they got attention, if that makes sense. This is fairly normal in security. If you don't monitor anything, then it's very easy to realize that you're good. By the time you get more visibility, you start first finding out that the problem is a lot bigger than you thought it was, and then you get ready to tackle it. So as part of the initial recommendation in August, we had also added some medium-term recommendations of like how we could potentially provide more guardrails in the landscape, could do some things like central logging, use organizational policies, and improve our scanning capabilities. So we held a workshop in November 2019 for something that ultimately became Secure Cloud Delivery, where we brought in the public cloud partners. Sorry if I say hyperscalers, that's a very SAP specific term for public cloud providers. So we brought in AWS, GCP, and Azure. We brought in our partners from SAP Global Security, and a bunch of people from the multi-cloud team. So this was like, how are we going to plan and tackle the larger problem of, not just saying like, hey, we have alerts, but actually how do we follow up? We've started already with an office hours call every week where we could provide guidance and weekly follow-up, but there had to be something more. And one of the sobering moments were when in sort of the introductory, like, hey, here we are, and this is what we bring to the discussion. One of our public cloud providers made this statement that our defaults are set for ease of onboarding, not security. And that kind of takes your breath away, but it's also 100% truth. And it makes economic sense. Like, it's not something that we can blame these guys for. Their business is to provide infrastructure as a service. They want you to use that as easy as possible. If you first have to read 5 manuals and unlock 15 locks before you can run anything, then they'll probably run to the competition. This is reality, unfortunately. So there is, of course, the shared responsibility model for public cloud, and unfortunately, not nearly enough people read that. I personally like the one from AWS because it's actually really clear and makes a really clear distinction of what are you responsible for and what are they responsible for. And the way I always express it internally to our colleagues is that everything that you create in the cloud account is your responsibility. So if you thought that they were going to do it for you, no, you actually have to configure that correctly. And how do we do that? Like, so, you know, this is clearly this is like late 2019. We're aware of what's going on in the DevOps community and the InfoSec community, where it's clear that we've lost the battle very much by putting security at the tail end. We need to do this at the very beginning, as early as possible, in the hands of the developers, and not just at the quality gates at the end or with pen tests at the, you know, after deployment, but make sure that this is deeply ingrained in everything that we do when we produce code, and as, you know, a factory of producing software. This is critical for an organization like SAP. As I think most of this audience will know, fixing in cloud environments is an endless and exhausting job. Patching in the cloud seems silly if you can simply recreate your deployment corrected in infrastructure as code. And what we really wanted to do was enable teams along this journey and provide tooling, where possible, to assist them in that. So how can we make sure that we give them compliance scans as early as possible, so that they find policy violations in their development environments, and we can encourage even a behavior where you create your infrastructure in public cloud, you scan your landscape, you see if it's okay or not. If it's not, destroy it and repeat the cycle. So use compliance as code for your landscapes. We have had some other pieces around that we'll get to as well, but you know, when it comes to Chef Inspect, that was really the key part that we wanted to stress. Also, for any tooling that we want to put in place in public cloud, whether security tooling or otherwise, is that it has to be scalable, right? So anything that we do needs to be able to accommodate to potentially 3x annual growth and not break so that we have to change to something else. It also has to be deployable. One of the nice things about having organizational roles in public landscape is that you can deploy tooling that's cloud native without having to bother anybody and just apply it to the landscape. We've done that with CSPM tools. We do that with Chef Inspect as well, through organizational roles, being able to allow to scan any cloud account that is inside of the SAP organization in each cloud provider. And it has to be affordable. That sounds, you know, always a bit silly, and we get sometimes from vendors that you're big, you make a lot of money, so why don't you give me a whole lot of money? It's like, if we do that with every vendor, then very soon we're not a very big company anymore. It's kind of like, you know, how do the rich get rich? Mostly by not spending anything and watching very careful where it goes. Realize also that, you know, this has only become sharper in the months since then, through the COVID pandemic, where every dollar is, or euro in our case, is flipped over 5 times to see if it's really necessary. So you have to make sure that you build something or deploy something that's sustainable and ideally doesn't grow with the size of the landscape. One of the big problems in public cloud, which is kind of natural, because the more you use of it, the more you pay. But if you also apply tooling, ideally you don't want that tooling to become more costly with how successful you are, because then it becomes essentially just a percentage tax on everything that you do. So interestingly enough, during this workshop, one of the consultants from the public cloud provider who had actually been at Chef before said, have you considered Chef Inspect? And the funny thing is that we actually had, in the summer, we had looked at it. It was part of a set of evaluations that we do constantly to see what's out in the landscape. And we looked at it, was like, okay, that's a lot of work. We don't really have a lot of people on the team, but now it was suddenly brought up by somebody who knew the struggles that we work through and at least understand the size and scale involved, right? Like, if you work for a public cloud provider and you provide us with consulting, I kind of assume that you know what you're talking about when you talk about big scale. Like, we're small compared to those providers themselves. So, and it did make a lot of sense to us. So we didn't have a lot of people, so it did require certainly a people investment to get that going. But it would fit very well because it would be compliance as code in fitting entirely within the sort of workflows of infrastructure as code, CI/CD pipelines, and so on. So certainly for the cloud native members of the team, they were very excited about it and said, okay, what about scalability? How does this work over the size of our landscape? And Tim Jones, who together with Joe McRae on my team have a separate session talking about the technical stuff. He very confidently said, we'll containerize it. It should scale. And I was like, okay, you're the cloud native expert. I have never myself containerized anything yet. So are you sure? Yeah, pretty sure. Should scale. No worries. All right, good. Then since I trust Tim blindly, I never even doubted that he could be wrong. We then decided as outcome of that workshop that we would come up with something that we call secure by default cloud accounts. To a certain extent, we're still on that journey, but the idea was to set up preventative controls. So these would be baseline controls set up as organizational policies on each landscape that enforce MFA, enforce encryption at rest, ensure that TLS is of 1.2 plus, that logging is turned on at all levels, that Kubernetes server node logging is turned on. There's a whole series of those that we now have in place. And but initially, I think we had a list of about like 12 or so that we wanted to implement. And then for detective controls, we thought that was where Chef Inspect would play a role, especially on the shift left, developer enablement side, aligned with those preventative controls. So at this point, we definitely thought that this would be complementary to our CSPM tool that we were literally still deploying. We also wanted to build out reference architecture guides for each platform that translated the policy for each platform to what you actually had to do. So the policy said, like, don't expose admin ports to the internet, don't expose database ports to the internet. And the architecture guides actually explain, okay, this is what that means within GCP or Azure Ali Cloud context, as well as infrastructure as code building blocks. So known to be secure Terraform modules that could be cobbled together through a VARS file to create secure by default landscapes. All of that in close alignment with the SAP Global Security Policy team, who were fully part of this planning exercise, where we wanted to make sure that all of it was aligned right, so that, you know, and we've gotten to the point now where like the labels of the policy are implemented in the alerts, so that there's full traceability all the way down, including into the architecture guides and the preventative controls. So if you hit something, you know exactly, like you had that policy, that detective controls associated with that, you can fix it with that set of Terraform modules or these sets of remediations that you could execute, preferably not through the admin console if you really have to. But here's that IAC do that instead, right? That was really the idea. So that led to our first meeting with the Chef Inspect team in Belfast in February 2020. By then we had got some level of support for our proposal. It was actually submitted before the end of the year, saying like, Tim McKnight, this is what we think we should do. And it was rejected, and we were like, reject? What are you talking about? It said like, please resubmit. At the beginning of the year, we're starting a bunch of security initiatives, and we want you to actually be a part of that structure. So we became Secure Cloud Delivery and board-sponsored program, one of 5 major security initiatives, and actually 17 total, but that were monitored on a weekly basis by the executive board. So now the pressure was definitely on. This was our last business trip before the pandemic. We have a team in Belfast, and the chef team met us there in the fantastic Titanic Hotel over tea and biscuits. So it was very civilized, very good. And met Mark, Colin, and Anna from Chef, most of whom have still been supporting us along the way. So we talked about the scale that we had in the landscape. So we mentioned, you know, the number of cloud accounts we had, and they asked us about targets. We weren't particularly familiar with the terminologies, like, what do you mean target? What's a target? It's like, well, anything that you might possibly scan. It's like, okay, well, in that case, we're probably talking about 3 million, 3.5 million, and at least for just to get started, we probably need talking about 4.5 million. To which the reaction was like, how many targets? And you know, our reply was like, yeah, we get this a lot. It's not the first time that we speak to a vendor where we tell them the size of the landscape, and at some of them, especially during the COVID time, when you have a lot of this on video, you can see actually people seeing the reaction. So I had one time, poor soul, a guy tried to make a note, tried to write, and he actually lost his pen. Another one literally flinched and told him like, look, it's okay, we get this all the time. This is quite normal. But we found out later that at the time the top end of the volume rate card ran out at 100,000. So when you come in with 3.5 million, it's a little bit of a different conversation. And maybe this should have been an alarm bell for me, that we were embarking on something really special. But you know, Tim was so confident, and he never doubted at any point in time. You know, so it's like, hey, we're all good. This is going to be a good adventure for all involved. So we got our initial budget approval. So we managed to get actually a bunch of headcount into the team that helped us support building this all out. We set up further organizational support structures. This is actually when it comes to this security compliance aspect, I always stress this. It's not enough to have a tool. You need to have the entire support behind it. You need to have be able to distribute the alerts in an appropriate way. You need to have centralized monitoring. You need to bring the organization in. You need to make it something that the organization cares about, not just the security compliance people care about. And the more you can make that visible and the more you can help teams with that, the better it is. Like, we've been running our office hours now every week in morning time Pacific, so that we hit the European and one side of Asia, and then again in the evening for the US West Coast and APJ, to be a central point every week where teams can ask questions about anything relating to security and compliance in the multi-cloud landscape. And that's been proven very valuable. We have a distribution list of some 350 people and regular attendance that exceeds 50 to 80, which is remarkable for a weekly call that people don't have to join and don't get punished for if they don't. We started to develop our first controls and designed what the Kubernetes Chef Inspect cluster would look like, and deployed the first deployment to the development landscape on GCP on GKE. And that brings us literally to July 20th. Even when I put the slides together, I went back and verified, like, was that really our first release? That happened like 4 months after we first talked to Chef, but that was actually true. We had our first preventative controls were rolled out. So those were, I think, specifically addressing things like encryption at rest, encryption in transit, as well as centralized logging. That's, by the way, a really nice one that you can do with organizational policies. It's very easy to do, and it's very effective. If you have centralized logging, you can basically set on an organizational policy, log to this storage bucket, and every log from every cloud account goes into the same place, goes into a storage bucket, goes straight into our SIEM landscape. It's one of the easiest things you can do, and one of the most effective things you can do from a security perspective in public cloud when it comes to the visibility. Sorry, sidetrack. The detective controls, that was, of course, the big one for the Chef Inspect. So we had our first development cluster where we run global scans. And then we published our first version of the consumer container. So this one is deliberately designed to be run wherever the line of business wants to run. So install Docker on your laptop, give it your cloud credentials, and it will go off, scan that cloud account, and give you a report back in JSON, HTML, and another one that I forget. But again, watch Tim's and Joe's session. Because it's just a Docker container, it runs anywhere where Docker runs. So you want to plug it into your pipeline, you want to plug it into any compliance scans, or like we're now getting to a point where you actually have to submit a good Chef Inspect report as part of security validation to make sure that you pass your landscape. And of course, what we want to do is, like, please run it as many times as you want, so that before you get to security validation and any other security quality gates, you actually are already in good shape because you did this as part of your initial development. We advise teams, like, when you start with this, don't build one development environment, get a cloud account to just trash and create infrastructure so that you don't bother your colleagues, and create, destroy as many times as you need to in order to come up with this compliant landscape that now can host your machine images. Much better approach. We also released the first version of the architecture guides and building blocks for each of those landscapes, and we got very close with the SGS policy team. this is really cool because in the interaction of actually materializing the policy, you find little things that maybe are easily missed when you write a paragraph here and then several blocks down you write something else. So the policy actually got better, and any sort of misalignment in there got done because we were actually implementing it. It also, we had a couple of cases where you could really see that it became a dialogue between the intent of what the security team was trying to achieve and how practical that actually was on each of the landscapes. So I don't have any offhand case, but it happened again and again and again where it was like, okay, we'd like to achieve this goal. And they write a sentence and it's like, okay, that's nice, but this is either really hard to do on this landscape, but if we do this or the other, or like we consider this the valid configuration, we can very easily detect it or we can actually enforce it on an organizational level. So the policy got better with the implementation to the point where it became much more practical and even as a policy easier to read what was actually intended with the policy itself. So that whole alignment and lineage through the policies and the controls themselves has been super helpful. It's actually allowed us to find things that we otherwise wouldn't have found when anomalies happen in the compliance scans. We could actually figure out exactly like, oh, that happened because of that. That's very valuable. Meanwhile, I'm sad to say we had more CSPM tool challenges. We made progress on the basis of the alerts that we got. And to be frank, a lot of the challenges that we had, I think we would have run into with anyone else that was based on a SaaS service. I don't think this is sort of unique specifically to this particular vendor. One of the problems was, again, scalability. It was almost predictable. We were going to be the largest one, largest instance, largest separate instance, but things happen. Like we're talking as software developers here, things happen when stuff scale that you don't know, right? So like I'm not necessarily surprised when we run a tool, suddenly it's scales up to levels that they've not seen in their landscape, or they could never even think of load testing before. You're going to run into surprises, and it took us a while before we could get data out of the system at all. So it was alerts were ingested and needed to get it out. That eventually worked through API call and later on subsequently also through the UI. But when you have to distribute alerts out and drive an organization and you can't get data out of your tool, that's tough. Another thing that we ran into is I'm totally accepting of the fact that tools have false positives. That happens. This is security tooling. Almost all security tooling is not that good. It always requires a little bit of a follow-up, and you try to have as few of them as possible. If for every false positive that you get reported, you have to go back to a vendor, this becomes a multi-week exercise. It's nobody's fault, but that is simply the reality. If meanwhile the entire executive board is sitting on top of lines of businesses saying, why didn't you fix that yet? And why did you make progress from last week? And you have like a feeble answer like, yeah, we're talking to the vendor for a week or two, they're still investigating. It's not a good story under that kind of pressure. It also leads to lack of credibility within the organization when that happens. Right? At some point, you get a list of 3 or 4 that are in under review or fix, and you have to go through the alert set and say like, yeah, there's that, but there's qualification here, qualification there. It's really difficult to explain to executives, especially when you're already talking about a fairly complex security topic that they have trouble fully grasping. And then another thing is, and this is actually what we see with all security tooling now, is context is everything. And the bigger the landscape got, the more important that became. Like when we are now at some 12,000 active cloud accounts. If we can distribute that out in a meaningful way, you're just like shouting into the desert, asking some random group of people to do something. So everything has to be associated to who is actually ultimately responsible for it. And with all security tooling, essentially, we export the data out, map that to our multi-cloud database. This is a database that has ownership information for each of the cloud accounts. But more importantly, it also includes a cost center that is verified daily against the core SAP system that tells us the organizational hierarchy that that cost center belongs to. That goes 8 levels deep. Not everybody makes use of that, but many teams do. So you can go down all the way into a team, create a pivot table, and actually navigate the whole thing down. And the importance of this cannot be underestimated. Even more importantly, to do that association in an organization that is in constant flux. So if you have to maintain an organizational structure like SAP's in your security tool, then we have a mountain of work every time the organization change. And that will happen at least twice a year, right? There's new acquisitions that are coming in. So you have way too much work organizing that stuff within the tool. So it's much easier to handle that by a database, associate the alerts that are with a particular cloud account with the metadata of that database, and the structure reorganizes itself on the basis of the backend SAP system that translates the cost center information. It's maybe a little bit geeky, but this is a massive operational benefit when you're dealing on the size like this. So that was a point of why I was spending specifically extra time on this, is that what suits us best really is an alert engine. We don't need an interface of a tool. Like, we probably are going to export it anyway, get it into the seam, distribute it out, like add additional organizational context to it. And I'm still not aware of any security tool, and we talked to a lot of vendors, that allows say, an easy integration into a custom system to associate additional context to information. You do it in SIEM systems because you add tables in there, but you do a lot of the work there yourself. So what suits us best is an alert engine, and that brought us to a very interesting question. As you recall, Chef was initially thought more as complementary to the CSPM tool and associated with the preventative controls, but it's now October 2020. We are sort of midway through our 3-year contract with the previous vendor. By now, we have heard that if we don't change the contract terms, and with the growth of our landscape, that a renewal at the end would be at a number that, frankly, was very easy to be quoted a number like that, because then you can immediately say, no, you don't even have to think about it. So now we had a problem. What do we do? And can Chef Inspect actually replace our existing CSPM solution? Now, there would be some consequences to that, but let me first run through a couple of benefits. First of all, really just economic, we're already licensed for it. So no additional cost. It would mean that we are now half a year into the COVID pandemic. SAP, like everybody else, is like looking at, is every budget expense really necessary? So if we could do this with Chef Inspect, that would actually save the company money, make use of something that we already acquired, maximize the investment, and so on. By now, also, because of the growth that we had in the team, we actually went like, wait, we actually have the resources now to even consider this, whereas a year ago, it was like out of the question. And if we have the time until the end of the contract, which is Q1 2022 of the previous of the current CSPM tool, we have essentially a year to get it right and a quarter slippage if it doesn't. And it's like, okay, that sounds reasonable. A very important thing, and why we talked about the false positives before, is like, now we would own this ourselves. We would write the rules. If there's something wrong with the rules, either we find it in our own testing and we own this ourselves, or a line of business comes with that, us. We have the authority to scan their landscape. We can sit with them and say, what do you have in your landscape? Run that, because of course our vendor doesn't have that same level of access, right? So it becomes an information, grab information, make screenshots of an admin screen, passes along. They need to build a new environment. We can just test directly on their Canary and development landscape, make it massive speed in dealing with any such issues. Also, what's very nice is that, and this we don't take this lightly, is the benefits of, let me mention this one first, sorry. A reduction in the operational ticketing load. This sounds maybe weird, but we would onboard users into the CSPM tool. So a ticket would be created. Hey, I'd like to have access. Okay, good. Accounts need to be replaced in certain folders. Hey, can you do that? If we do this entirely through our self-organizing multi-cloud database that already have ownership associated with it, we don't have that problem at all. You just get onboarded, you get your data handed to you, off you go, right? That makes a massive difference in actually reducing the load on the team just handling tickets. And another really important thing, and this ties back to our multi-cloud notion, is that we're constantly at risk, I would say, for our executive board to decide that we're going to deploy another cloud platform. I'm not saying that that's coming. Don't take this as, you know, any hints, but it can happen at any point in time, and we have to be prepared for that. AliCloud, we were able to convince some vendors to support, but of course also because they saw some benefit into it. But what if somebody picks something that is strategic or whatever, and where the vendor says, like, we already have a contract with you, so you can't make it a condition of sale. We have no intention to provide this because we don't see a market for it. Then we would have to find a solution. Chef, Inspect being open source, we could actually fix this problem, and we actually solved the AliCloud problem together by working together on the first AliCloud provider that is now available, and we continue to contribute to. Chef Inspect has coverage for compliance scanning in AliCloud. It's fantastic. We're happy that it exists, that we can do it. If another weird one comes that we have to support, we have the ability to do that again. Meanwhile, the community gets the benefit of being able to run compliance scans on AliCloud landscapes. And this extends beyond, because we have made a couple of additional changes on the AWS one, I know explicitly, but there's a couple others where we, because we ourselves were interested in providing the control, we were able to add to the API backend, implementing new additions that AWS had just added to the Cloud API. So, you know, that's super good for us, super good for all of you. We're happy to continue that as we build out more and more of our use cases. At the same time, right, the reality is that I answer to a lot of people in this company, and nobody has had done this before. Like, the size was a bit insane, and you know, if you still look for CSPM solutions, I don't think you see top Chef Inspect in the top 10 there, when they probably should by now. What we also found is that that was simply the reality and what we see with other vendors, but Chef did not have the experience with the scale, neither did we. So this was definitely a bit of a gamble. And just to add to the pressure, I mean, we're talking about SAP's compliance requirements, but like this is a function that is required for certification, ISO, SOC 2, all kinds of regulatory things, CRITIS, there's a whole bunch of them. If we get this wrong, we're in really big trouble. And I'm putting a whole lot of people into trouble. So there's some reputations on the line, most notably my own. So there was definitely like, okay, what could give us to the point where we say like, we are confident enough that we can pull this one off. So the first thing, of course, given the scalability question is that we had to do scalability testing. And this actually was planned December 2020. Team got ready, deployed on Kubernetes, all set, and it went spectacularly well to the point of uneventful. So we had 7 million cloud resources scanned during the run, 3 nodes in GKE, 3 hours to scan the entire landscape across 4 cloud providers. We, just by pushing it, see if we could, we pushed it to 280 running containers, but it's really more like 150 in normal operations at a cloud run cost that actually here is projected but proven to be less than that, which is very nice if that's all it does. We even found that we could keep a whole bunch of history within that price point, so that was very good. I heard about the results of this after it happened. Was done on a weekend to minimize anything that could possibly happen to any of our cloud landscapes. They are 24/7, of course, but the reality is that most of these are business software, so they have a bit of a Monday to Friday thing. So, let's see what happens, push this up, and everything good. So I'm very happy with the results. And then Tim tells me like, oh, that Chef had a team on standby. It's like, standby? Like, did they think that anything could go wrong? It's like, yeah, they had 20 people waiting for it. It's like 20 people? It's like, now I'm not so sure like whether I wanted to know this in advance or after, because that sounds like something could happen. And he actually told me that the reason he found out was like it was set up, but he got a call saying like, hey, Tim, did you postpone the testing? It's like, oh, sorry, like, no, we did the testing. It was all good. Thank you very much. Oh, okay, let the team go then. What? No, we're all good. Went well. It was a really good result, and because of the levers that we have, like with the reality is that we run scans on a daily basis for the global compliance, especially since the teams can run it anytime they want, so they don't have to wait for us. So we have a 3-hour window that could extend this essentially to 12 if by then we probably start to get a little worried, but we can also always throw more nodes at it at the same time. And because it is very much running on a schedule that creates workloads, once it's done, it dies down to almost nothing. So it's very busy for a couple of hours and then it drops down. So that led us basically to, okay, can Chef Inspect replace our existing CSPM solution? Well, at least on the aspect of scalability, it absolutely can. So that made us feel better, and it's still humming along nicely without any trouble whatsoever. So as a result, so 2021 really became a conversion year to build out the entire rule set, which is about 150 or so controls, but ask Tim and Joe, they will keep you straight. We've had 2 control releases since then, with a lot of this already in working and in use by teams in the company. And we actually recently found the first false negative in the current CSPM tool after something unfortunate happened in a production landscape that hadn't been detected in the Canary landscape. We ran a Chef scan against it, and Chef did find the policy violation there, which is yet another milestone, really. And that brings us really to today, ChefConf 2021, telling you all about this crazy journey that actually worked out. We're now running 14 million cloud resources per daily run across 12,000 cloud accounts. We're setting up deployments uniquely for China now, because that ultimately seems to make more sense than to run it from outside. And I have to thank this fantastic team, both on the multi-cloud side as well as in global security side, that were directly responsible for making this all happen. It was certainly not me. This was a good team of people, and there's of course way more people in a supporting role that should have been listed, but then the forms would get real small. That also goes for the Chef Inspect team that have been with us along the way, and at least 20, 25 people that we've touched in some way or other. So it's been fantastic success. We are due to release the full high and medium control set by the end of this quarter. And then we should go live with full conversion at the end of 2021. If anything unexpected happens, then we have another quarter or so to get it right. But this quarter will really be focused on how do we get the analytics right, how do we get the API access right. There's a bunch of use cases like that that maybe Tim and Joe can also talk about. And that brings me to the very end of the story. And I realize I've gone a little bit over time, but it's
that's great. It's a great story, Jay. Thank you very much. There are some questions though I have that I'd like to make, and maybe you can answer them. You mentioned compliance, some of the requirements that you had. So what sort of compliance audit requirements do you have, and how has it worked? How has this work changed your complete kind of audit process before and after implementing Chef Inspect?
So it kind of comes as a larger package, right? So it's really the policies drive the detective scans, the preventative scans, as well as the developer tooling that we provide. So the linkage of all of these in the package sort of multiply the whole. Where I think the Chef piece really comes in is, for both of the efficiency of our own team in not having to deal with the issues that you might have with a SaaS provider, but especially the sort of the type of behaviors that you start encouraging, right? Like, it was not accidental that we wanted to provide a consumer container. That was really the focus from the start. And to do that in Docker meant that, okay, you developer can run it from your laptop, but you can also run it inside of your infrastructure. You can run it inside of your pipeline. You can run it essentially wherever you want, because we have a wide variety of different pipelines, tooling, etc., that people use. So you want to be as flexible as possible, right? And combining that with the organizational follow-up has been very powerful. For instance, being able to say, in combination with the preventative controls that we have, we saw this especially with ports exposed to the internet that shouldn't be, like 22 admin ports, RDP, as well as managed database services like MongoDB or something like that. And being able to detect that, tell people that the preventative control is coming, because it was released in Q1 this year. So we announced already in Q4 2020, like, these controls are coming. Here's the Chef container, scan your environment for it, go fix it. If you think you fixed it, run it again. Like, don't ask me or wait for a week for a report to come out. Run it again, keep doing it. And if you have any questions, come and ask us, right? So that you prepare an organization for these preventative controls, in essence, so that once they're implemented, first of all, they're prepared for the legacy that's already there, but now also they have the Chef container in hand to prepare themselves when they build new landscapes, so that when they avoid running into controls that are also remediating, say, certain things in their landscapes in a somewhat forceful way, right? Nobody wants you to be auto remediated. We want you to get it right from the first time around.
Did you have any security audits that have been shortened or decreased with this new kind of approach that you're taking?
Yes, but realize that we're not entirely fully live yet, right? So one of the aspects that is definitely an important aspect is that, yes, we provide the developer tooling for everybody, but we also have this central compliance scan that cannot be tampered with, right? So our global Chef cluster scans the entire landscape. Like, nobody touches that, right? It's essentially
and that becomes a single source of truth.
Single source of the truth, scans the entire landscape. Either you have an exception or you don't have an exception. If we don't know about it, doesn't count, right? We collect all of that centrally, goes to the SIEM landscape, goes into reporting, generates analytics and dashboards and presentations and executive updates throughout the organization. And if somebody in the organization says, like, oh yeah, but I really have only this because those ones don't count, it's like, well, that's not what my record says. Yes. And in case of dispute, it definitely happens that our board area COOs will come and check with us. It's like, team says they don't need to do these ones. What do you think? And it's sometimes it's okay, yeah, that's actually a thing. But in other cases, it's like, no, get out of here. Just get into it.
Another topic. You mentioned building the team from SAP, and I guess in advance of this, but the skill set that you had, the teams may have to learn a lot about Chef and Inspec in particular. But how did your team kind of build their Inspec skills?
That was actually fairly simple. Like, we kind of hire for talent rather than necessarily existing skills. So we look for people that hopefully have something cloud native, hopefully know how to script or develop something well, or know DevOps or Ops very well. Hopefully you have 2 of those. If you have 3 of those, fantastic. If you have 4, then I probably can't afford you. But you get that kind of sense where we're looking for skills, talent, willingness to learn. And the more we were able to define what we were doing, because we already had something in place. So like, our initial recruiting was probably a bit more of a gamble, because we had to explain we're trying to do something that is kind of difficult to articulate, and I don't have anything for you to read. But more recently, in the last sort of 6 to 9 months after that initial release, you can tell this is what we've done. Talk about it, and then people also have a better idea of what it is that we're looking for, because we're looking for somewhat an interesting intersection. And I want to make a distinction between SecDevOps and DevSecOps. DevSecOps, absolutely believe in that, but it's a slightly different thing. That's doing DevOps of building applications in a secure way. We do SecDevOps, which is SecOps with DevOps baked in, right? And of course, it has a lot of overlaps, but it has to be understood that the role is still a SecOps role, and not like, let's build cool new product together, because the cool new product that we build is SecOps related and compliance scanning for the entire company.
Yeah. Did the team have to do anything special to accelerate their ramp up time with Chef Inspect?
Honestly, like I would say no. Like it's probably better again to ask Tim and Joe because they had to do it themselves. But
Okay, fair
I think
enough.
there was like we had a initial 5-day consulting that got most of the team onboarded. I don't think many had much Ruby experience, but the syntax is fairly simple to figure out, and it's also sort of in spec Ruby because there's a sort of limit of things what you're going to use, and they've taken to it very quickly. Like I've never heard for someone like, oh, I wish it was in, say, Python to make it easier.
Right.
It works really well.
Okay. Yeah. One last question. So you talked about SAP's journey and quite extensively, impressive, discovery of the issues that you didn't know you had, and how you explored Chef to find out, and we worked together in a way to overcome that and to find out the scalability level of everything. So with that journey in mind, what are some of the kind of top recommendations you have to companies that are in the beginning of this journey or starting out? What is the good, the bad, and the watch out?
Realize that the basics are hard, and it's still about the basics, right? So I think there's a little bit too much of this, oh, let's go get this fancy tool that does AI, ML, network monitoring, that sends your alerts to your cell phone or something like that. Just realize that asset management is hard. That getting an organization to fully adopt MFA on their cloud accounts is hard and requires work, right? A lot of this is organizational. Like tools certainly help, but a lot of this stuff you need to get done, get buy-in, get detection, get enforcement done. Like policies without actually verifying that people are doing it have no sense. Just reporting that somebody did something wrong by itself is also not enough. So you need to even build like within the organization structures that follow up, create accountability and responsibility. We all love the idea of DevOps teams having more autonomy, fine, but stick to the rules as well, right? And that's the balance that we have to figure out. And our hope is to make the secure simpler and easier, right? So that rather than teams themselves figuring out and maybe getting it wrong, we'd like to give them tools to that say like, hey, would you like to save 100 hours worth of infrastructure as code work on a platform that you don't really know well, and that you have to do again when you move to a different cloud provider where you all have to do the same thing? Why don't you use our tool set, save you a whole bunch of time, and if our scans say that something's wrong, you either changed it or you can come to us and ask like, what's wrong because I used your stuff. And that accelerates developers, of course, fantastically.
Yeah, great point. Well, thank you for your time, Jay. Thank you for a very insightful SAP journey. And we really appreciate all that you've done together and that we've done together, and appreciate your time here presenting at Chef Conf 2021. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great Chef Conf.